quick review. We were saying that in the statement of Yahoo, it calls the 10 speheros by the name Tikunim. And the question is, why are they called Tikunim? What's the reason for it? So we said in order to understand that, we have to understand really what is the soul in general. And we started off by saying that the nefesh itself is something pashut bli hischalkus. It doesn't have any parts. It's indivisible oneness. And the intellect and the emotions are garments for it, right? And we said not to be confused with what it says in Tanya, where it says that the essence of the soul is intellect and emotions, and but not to be confused, because that's just referring to as they are compared to the garments called thought, speech, and action, if you recall from yesterday's class. And compared to thought, speech, and action, yes, the intellect and the emotion are keviyachol, so to speak, essential. But the real reality of it is that the soul is truly essential, and even the intellect and the emotions are merely garments. What I just said was a kind of a wrapped up an hour lesson yesterday. Does everyone remember that? Understand what I just said? Okay. I'm going to take your word for that one.
No, don't take my word.
Well, you weren't there, so you don't get an opinion on this one. Sorry, my friend. Anyway, so going on, as it were.
It's recording. I remember that, alright.
Well, it's right there for eternity. Okay, so go after the parentheses.
Do you have any more of these?
Yes, I do. Good to see you. Okay, so right after the parentheses, we last off saying that the seichel and midos, the intellect and the emotions, are not essential, right? They are just garments. And if you go all the way to the bottom of the parentheses there, it's about 12, 15 lines down from the first column. The line ends with the words Ella Shahain. See that? Two words at the end of the line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines down, right after Mamash, yeah. Ella Shahain, 11 lines down from the first column. Alright, so they're not essential to the soul. Ella Shahain nikroin b'shem tikunin. But rather, these intellect and emotion, they're called by the name Tikunim. Shanefesh, and again, they're really the 10 speheros of the soul, right? Intellect and emotion is Chabad, Chagas, Nehim. Those are the 10 speheros of the soul. Why are they called Tikunim? Why are they called Tikunim? Shanefesh mistakenes umislaveshes behen. And the reason is because the soul gets fixed and gets enclosed in them. So this essential soul, which is indivisible, it gets, so to speak, fixed. As it's a strange word, but it means enclosed into these 10 speheros, and that's why they're called Tikunim. The Kamosh, where do we see that the word Tikun really means to enclose? As it says in the Targum Onkelos, on the pasuk Lo Yilbash Gever Simlas Isha. Right, the pasuk says that a man is not allowed to wear the garments of a woman. Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But it says Lo Yitaken Gever Betikune Itasa. Right? The translation of that word, Lo Yilbash, right, is Lo Yitaken. Means you shouldn't tikain. In other words, so literally the translation of the word to enclose is tikun. So that's where really we're going with this. In other words, our translation of tikun is to fix. It's kind of like not in the picture right here. It really means to dress up. And so why are the 10 speheros called tikunim? Because it's the way that the infinite part of the soul, which is indivisible, it dresses up in these 10 speheros. So that's what it means, tikunim.
Tikkun, that means that I'm not actually fixing things at its core, I'm just patching stuff.
Again, I'm trying to point out, I guess, that our general concept of the word tikkun is not necessarily what's being said here, although you can't really get away from it. But the word tikkunim here doesn't mean to fix, it means to dress up. That's what we're saying. So, dressing up and fixing, I guess, are two different things. Right? But the idea is that the infinite light of the soul is wearing the 10 speheros. And we see that Pashat, it's the translation. Vinyan tikkun, alright, and what is this word tikkun, to dress up exactly? Humalashin tachshit. It really comes to the word jewelry. In other words, seemingly it's not just a regular type of garment, but it's a it's a beautifying type of garment. Shemiskashet bo umispal mimeno, that you adorn yourself, right? With these, the word tikkun means you adorn yourself. So the Or Ein Sof is, as it were, adorning itself with these speheros umispal mimenu, and it gets affected from them. In other words, when you adorn yourself with something, it changes your status. You get affected from your adornments. But here is not a regular type of adornment, or maybe this is what adornment really means, which we don't usually think of it like this. But
when you're wearing clothes, it clothes your body, but when you're wearing jewelry, it improves your look. It's not just better.
Yeah. The only thing I think of is like, sort of like, like the girls put in their hair like these extensions. It like becomes part of you. In other words, it's not really removable. What's that?
No, unlike it.
You can take it off, and I'm just saying it's the kind of thing that when you put it on, because it's hard for us to think jewelry. Why is it? Because let me just translate the sentence first. He says, "Misachedim tachshidze." You become one with this adornment. Keilu hu migufo mamash, as though it's part of your body. So I guess what he said, I think there was such a thing that you don't take off your wedding ring for the rest of your life, kind of thing. Like there's certain adornments that you put on you that you never take off, or that they're like even if you do take them off from time to time, but when they're on, it's like your look. It's part of you, right? It's not just clothing you happen to be wearing. It like makes the man. Did you want to say something, Tzemach?
A tattoo becomes one with whether we're allowed to do that.
A tattoo is not
scar.
not an adornment. But I hear what you're saying. It's like say it's henna. Right.
Yeah, henna.
Okay, fine, exactly. But it becomes one with you. The kamo nefesh. That's what he's saying. The 10 speheros are to the Or Ein Sof. Kamo nefesh imaguf. And again, the analogy we gave yesterday is like the soul with the body. She'ima yosha guf hu levush lenefesh. That even though the body is merely, and this is basically, sometimes the analogy is much clearer, obviously than the nimshal, the analog. So we're saying here that the body and the soul represent this concept, which is very clear, much more than jewelry. That the soul, that the nefesh imaguf, ima yosha aguf hu levush, even though the body is a garment merely for the soul and nefesh, makom hu nefesh mispaeles mimikri aguf, but it gets so unified with the body when it comes into it that the soul is actually affected by what happens to the body, right? To the point that shaguf nokef etzbao, when the body will stub its toe, margeshes on nefesh, right? This is mamish unity. The soul feels pain when the body stubs its toe. So this is a type of unity. I'm saying it's hard to understand what that means in terms of jewelry, right? Sometimes we're using the analogy to understand jewelry, but I don't.
It goes away. The jewelry explains what the lower is, what the higher is, what the lower is to the higher, and the nefesh with the guf explains what the higher is to the lower. Those jewelry doesn't feel when you feel pain, but it does add to your essence. It does add to your look. It becomes part of your look. Whereas the nefesh of the soul is the opposite way. The nefesh feels the body. They're going both ways. There's an analogy for either way. The way the clothing feels on the person is the muscle of the nefesh of the guf.
The way the clothing feels to the person.
Is the muscle of the guf to the nefesh.
Wait, hold on. Which one is which? I'm confused. I imagine only that if I'm confused, probably other people here are confused as well.
Jewelry is not a mere addendum to the body.
Wait, say it again. Start from the beginning. Maybe there's
Jewelry
something.
is not a mere addendum to the body.
The jewelry is not a mere addition. It's united with the body.
It unites with the body because it's actually, I understand this metaphor very well. If somebody's ugly, but they put on certain jewelry, or glasses, it's not just about them plus the clothing like it would be with clothing. The clothing serves a purpose to conceal your body here. It adds to your. Good clothes could be partially jewelry, but it changes your look. It adds to your look. An ugly person, the Gemara says, an ugly person.
So you become one with it. Okay.
It changes the whole thing. It makes something of it.
Okay, sounds good.
That's one way. The other way is the way the external is to the internal. Jewelry that won't show that because the jewelry still doesn't feel.
No, but what he's trying to say is not so much that he's trying to say that the soul feels what happens to the body, not that the body feels.
That's the second metaphor.
Right.
The first metaphor shows that the body is one with the soul. The second metaphor shows that
body is one with the soul. Okay, I hear what you're saying. That's nice. All right, he's saying the first metaphor is that the body is one with the soul, which means that
It adds to the soul.
that the soul is improved by the body. Okay, it's a little bit tricky there. All right.
It's adorned with the body.
Okay, I got you for a second there. That's probably the best I can do for now. But obviously there's something different about these two metaphors if he brings them both. Anyway, let's just put it like this. The body enters into the soul enters into the body to the point that they become so unified that whatever happens to the body actually happens to the soul. That's an intense level of unification. In other words, it's not just adorning it, right? But it actually becomes one with it to the point that what happens to this external garment automatically happens to the internal one that's dressed in the garment. So this is a unity. V'kein masha ola b'ratzon hanefesh, right? Lifol eza pa'ula be'ivarim, and here's the other direction, right? So he says not only when something happens to the body, the soul immediately feels that pain, but the other way around as well, that when the soul decides to do something, the body immediately listens to it. In other words, there's no separation. And what he means is, let me translate that line, Kol masha ala b'ratzon hanefesh, anything that arises to the will of the soul, right? Lifol eza pa'ula be'ivarim, to accomplish some deed with the limbs. Ha'ivarim nishmaim l'ratzon zeh teikuf miyad. The limbs listen to this will instantaneously, right? Yeah, let me just finish the sentence and we'll get a question. Instantaneously, kesha'ola b'ratzonu la'asos ha'pa'ula. As soon as it arises to the will to do something, right? And what he's going to say here is that there's no delay of time, right? If there was some kind of delay of time, that would indicate that there's a sort of a transference from the soul to the body. They have to communicate with each other in some way. But what he's saying is that they don't have to communicate with each other because they're one. When the soul desires something, it's already in the body doing it, right? So this is a type of unification. It's no longer two things, right? It becomes one thing. That's why it's a little bit harder to understand when it comes to jewelry. But I guess what you're saying is that the jewelry and the glasses, or it makes a person beautiful, he can't even imagine himself without the jewelry. It becomes his personality, it becomes his persona. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to say that because I put spell on people every day, and some of people say no. So you're saying that they're so they don't want to put the spell on, or is that what you're saying?
That's the right way.
But
because you said that we asked to like.
no, but what I'm saying is a kind of a different conversation. Why? Because it's not so much. If they wanted to put on tefillin, put it like this. Where does that conversation fit in here? The second they decide they wanted to put on tefillin, their arm is going to extend. In other words, there's no.
So they don't want.
I mean, they have a nefesh Bahamas, nefesh Elokis. You know, part of them wants, part of them doesn't want. I mean, this is an old story, right? The Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Tov. There's two souls, right? We're not only, you have a nefesh Bahamas as well. Look, the nefesh Elokis is also enclosed into your animal body. But the truth is that they're fighting over who gets to rule the body. But the point is if the nefesh Elokis desires to do something, it as well has to put it like this. What you're saying is a third level, right? That right now I don't believe he's necessarily talking about the nefesh Elokis versus the nefesh Bahamas. He's just talking about soul and body. But the way it works is that there's three things that are actually enclosed in one another. The body is the garment. The soul comes in and becomes the nefesh Bahamas becomes unified with that garment. And the nefesh Elokis becomes unified into the garment of the nefesh Bahamas, a soul garment, right? But they all become one. So the point is that if you're able to arouse your nefesh Elokis, it has the same scenario going on. The second it desires, the instant it desires, it's already invested and one with the nefesh Bahamas, which is one with the nefesh, with the goof itself, and the action is had. The point here is we're trying to make is that once this is a very unique thing, because if you think about, usually the way two things come together as one, you always maintain a sort of distinction between the two. How can you really make two things into one, right? But when it comes to the soul and the body, it's very clear to see that the soul and the body, which are two things, and just wearing the body, it becomes one with its garment. They're indistinguishable. And he says, for example, haregel ha'aloch bo, in other words, whatever part of your body you're talking about, whether it's the foot to walk with, etc. He just kind of throws that in there. Any aspect of the body, and there's bli shum kedimas hispashtus vamshachas hamachshava. This is without any preface of an extension and drawing forth of the thought, ma'amoach beregel, of the mind into the foot. Right? In other words, what he's trying to say is, when you want to move your foot, You instantaneously move your foot without having to send instructions from the mind to the foot.
I think this is just a metaphor because the mice scientists do measure how long it takes for the brain to tell the foot to move, and it's like
I'm gonna just stop you for a second because I one time had a astrophysics professor, like 23 years old. He's like the smartest kid probably we ever had around here. Yeah, he was in the yeshiva, and I learned this, and someone called out and said that, and he said the truth is that if you want to know like the cutting edge science on the matter, it's completely up in the air. There's some scientific studies that show, crazily, that the foot actually moves before the brain gives the signal. And yeah, because in other words, it's really like a reaction. The brain's reaction is like the wheel which is inside the foot is what's happened first, and that goes well with Chassidus because the will is the soul essentially, and it's everywhere in the body at once, right? In other words, your soul, your mind, let's say, is in your head, and your emotions are in your heart, but your will is equally in every single part of your body. Your will does not have a spot in the body where it is that it has to like decide that you have your will in your head, therefore it's going to send a message to your... It's true regarding, let's say, intelligence. If you want to move your foot in a way of intelligence, right, in an intellect, like you want to kick a soccer ball or something fancy, there is intelligence that you have to bring from the head into the foot and train the foot. But once you do that, it's also a concept that the intelligence gets lodged into the foot. And it becomes like the intelligence of the foot. That intelligence is also no longer in your head. It becomes lodged into your foot. According to Chassidus, it works kind of like that. But anyway, it says over there that the whole soul is in every single part of the body simultaneously, unlike the other powers. And therefore, this is what he's saying here, that you don't need to have instructions from the will to the foot because your will is in your foot already. And this that they say from science, okay, they say this, they say that. I don't think it's so clear.
It's good to have that. That guy was good to have here.
That guy was good. We had a few good guys like that, scientists. Yeah.
Could be very annoying also.
Let's not go there. Anyway, She'im Kain, your own's been around the block in this issue. She'im Kain,
Sounds like we missed out.
She'im Kain haya'eze shi'ui zman, right? If so, in other words, if, getting hugs all around Avi. So he says like this, that the truth of the matter is you see that the effect of the will is instantaneous, and there's no need for a message to be sent, as it were, from the mind to the foot to move your foot. She'im kain haya'eze shi'u zman ma. Because if it was like that, there would be a delay, right, in how much time it takes to move your foot from how much time it takes to think to move your foot. Right? Eino shoe afilu rega. And there is no delay, not even an instant. Right? I think I had another scientific friend who took your position, and his proof was that, where do they learn that in science, is that when a person gets into a car accident, they've like measured the time it takes him to press the brake and have a reaction is a little bit like after the fact when the actual accident happens.
Yeah, like you see the thing in slow motion. Like
but the truth of the matter is that that's not necessarily a proof, because he might not have even like registered that he has to move his foot just by seeing it. You know, some things like come into your...
You're in shock.
Yeah, in other words, you're in a state of, not even shock, but you're not even in a state of like realizing that it happened until you realize it. The second you realize it, you push your foot on the brake. In other words, I just don't think that study holds its weight. If you want to say that it's just a metaphor, but that's not what he's saying here. And it's said in so many places in Chassidus, and he gets into details about it. He said there's not even a shiur of a rega. He said there's absolutely...
A rega is a full 60th of a minute.
First of all, it's not. It's like 1,482nd of a second. You know, it's not a long time. It's the smallest amount of time possible in reality. And what he means is there's not even a rega. He mamash means there's not even a rega. In other words, I'm saying this is something that Chassidus holds, and it's not metaphorically. You know? So the question is, if you're going to say that there's science that goes against it, first of all, I'll tell you that there's science that doesn't. And ultimately, these kinds of arguments, Torah always wins. In other words, the science will come to realize that this is not an optional statement. Okay, scientists are watching this. You'll have to go find some Jewish scientists and work it out with your friends there. Anyway, because this is a principle, an important principle in Chassidus, that there's a unification of the soul into the body in such a way that there's no communication that has to happen between one and the other, because it is there already.
But just to clarify further,
Yeah.
the brain is part of the body.
Mm-hmm.
So if the brain takes a millisecond, or 2 milliseconds, or 8 milliseconds, or 2 weeks,
But the brain,
or 2 weeks,
but the brain,
or 2 weeks,
but the brain is not the will.
exactly my point.
No,
it's just
so-
part of the body.
No, your will is in your foot. So people are of the opinion that for you to move your foot, you have to think to move your foot.
Absolutely not.
Okay, so what are you saying there?
This is what I was getting
No,
to.
that's what he's.
This
That's
is
what he's
exactly what I'm
resolving.
getting to, is that the brain is no different than the foot. It's part of the body, and that the whatever mechanism that we're talking about, whether the brain takes this and that, is all just part of the body. That in fact, soul and the body are one, and just because it may take a little longer for the brain, that's just the physical world. So even if it takes a moment or whatever, that's again.
But it doesn't take a moment, and that's the point we're
but my
dealing
point
with.
is that regardless, whatever science says or doesn't say, it makes no difference that the soul and the body are in fact one.
Okay.
And that just like, I don't know, I'm not making
It makes
myself
a
clear.
difference to me.
No,
That
I
you're
think
completely
that-
marginalized. You've ruled out the whole battle. Like, the thought process of whether or not I want to act according to it seems like reflex versus choosing to do the right thing. Maybe moving my leg is flirtatious or something, and it's just natural for me because I do it all the time. But if it's just there's
You're
no
willing
type
it,
of thing.
right? In other words, a person's
So there's no
body
power.
language.
I'm separating thinking itself from the soul.
Right.
I'm saying that it's just that if you can divide those two and recognize that the brain, anything within the body, the physical body, is all part of the body, and that mechanism works the way it does. The same way that the leaves grow on the tree at a certain pace, you can't say that the life force in the tree is separate from the tree. It takes a certain pace for the leaves to grow. It takes a certain pace for a tree to grow. It takes a certain pace for your hair to grow. It takes a certain pace for your foot to move from your brain. They're all different pacings that's within the physical mechanism, but the actual soul that's connected to the body is one and not separate, and that once the command is issued, how long it takes, whether it's a microsecond or 2 microseconds or 2 months, is not separate. But in fact,
But
just
that
one
right there is
mechanism.
where I'm taking issue. There's zero delay,
No,
and the
but
reason that there's zero delay is because it's not a command issued. That would imply that there's two things there, right? That's the point we're trying to make.
saying the same thing.
I
We're
think
saying the same thing.
to
We're not
say
saying
what
the same
you're
thing.
saying-
It's symbiotic.
To say what you're saying, I think he's saying like this: when the body moves, that's when the nefesh issues that's when the nefesh issues the command. Exactly when the foot moves. If scientists find that from the brain issuing the command to the leg takes a certain amount of milliseconds, that's immaterial because the actual.
What they're finding actually is that it happens afterwards. That's what I'm trying to say.
Which is great, which is fine too.
So
The point is it's
this
immaterial.
conversation is
The
material.
point is it's immaterial. You're assuming that when the brain issues the command, that's when the nefesh issues the command. That's not necessarily so.
Why? Because
That's when
first of
the
all, what
body
you guys are
moves.
saying is
That's
nefesh.
when the nefesh issues.
There's something called ratzon, and again, I think what the
Right,
main
so the ratzon
the
might
main
be in the
problem
nefesh,
with
not
this
in the brain.
conversation
That's
is
the
that
thing.
what you're calling brain is what we think mistakenly is called the will.
No,
That's exactly what he's saying.
This is exactly
That's
what I'm saying. We're on the
exactly what he's
same point,
saying.
that the brain has nothing to do with the will. The brain is just
Right.
part of the mechanism of the
Right,
body.
so you don't
And
have
that
to be
the-
right scientifically
Yeah.
about this. Science is measuring how long it takes from the brain to
The
get
brain
to
is
the foot.
irrelevant.
That has
The brain
nothing
is
to
just
do
part
with
of the
the
body.
ratzon
It's
and
like the
nefesh.
finger. It's just another piece of the body. It's not the will at all. The will is separate from the brain completely. The brain is just the hardware that.
Okay,
that
but
is-
I think what's a chiddush over here, what's novel, and what most people don't realize, is that the will acts independently of the brain. In other words,
Exactly.
I know it's exactly because it says it in this book, but I'm telling you, most people in the world do not think like this. Most people consider the will to be something that's happening in their head.
Right, I mean,
Right?
that's what I
And
was
it's
trying to separate.
and it's not.
That's
The
what I was
will
trying
is
to
inside of
separate.
every single aspect of your body simultaneously. It's an amazing thing. Right? So you're able to perform functions with completely circumventing basically the brain, you know?
These commands are
Habitual.
executed in sync, yeah? From the moment.
Yeah, let's go on. We all get
Yeah,
the
no,
point.
hold on.
I know, but it's
Where's
frustrating
the-
already.
where's the
I don't want to talk about it
decision
anymore.
process
We're
here?
moving on.
Let's move on. We
Kamo nefesh imaguf.
Go back later.
Okay, so the idea is that after the period over here. So we're saying there's no delay of time whatsoever. It doesn't wait even an instant. The moment it goes up into the will, the body is moving because they're one. This is only because the body becomes one with the soul. And the soul is able to therefore work through it. In other words, it's like it's wearing a suit, right? You wouldn't say that there's a delay of time between your jacket moving from your arm moving, right? Because the second you move your arm, your jacket's moving. They don't have to communicate with each other. It's wearing it. So too, the soul is wearing the body. So it's affecting whatever it wants to do. It's doing, and it's just doing it in a material way suddenly, rather than a spiritual way, right? In other words, it's just the same one entity, but because it's wearing a material suit, it's able to affect things materially as opposed to just spiritually. That's what it means. They become one. It's just sort of, that's what it means also, nefesh elokam imal mamish, right? The chiddush of the word mamish. I think in Eov, it talks about nefesh elokam imal, right? There's an old statement that there's a nefesh elokam imal, there's a, chelik elokam imal, there's a piece of, your soul is a piece of God, right? But then the word mamish means that same piece of God, it becomes material. In other words, it just turns into a material entity. And this is the chiddush of what we're saying here, is that your soul just becomes one with the guf. And po'elas bo kirtzona, it does whatever it wants according to its will, ke'ilu haya atzmuso mahusa mamish, as if it was the very same entity, the very same essence mamish. And even though it's not the same entity, because the body is really merely a garment for the soul, but it unites with it. So he says, so right now, that was a metaphor for the body and the soul. But now in the soul itself, we started this conversation not by talking about the body and the soul. We started this conversation talking about the soul itself and its garment, which is its intellect and its emotions. So all that was a metaphor for how the soul, before it becomes physical, its own spiritual body is its intellect and its emotions. So now we can understand how the soul unites with intellect and with emotion.
And Ratzon is separate from
Ratzon is the soul, what we're saying basically right now, right?
Like is it like expressing itself? That like is that, and then its garments are seichel and midos?
I mean, I guess just the presence that there is a soul versus there isn't a soul is the Ratzon, right? The Ratzon is called Natiyas HaNefesh. It's just like the leaning of the soul before it gets into leaning itself into mind or into heart or into thought or into speech or into action. It's just like leaning, which means it's sort of presenting itself as opposed to being in a state of nullity.
Like animals.
I don't know about animals. It's
Well, to think that animals would have
but animals are having full emotional experience. They're having somewhat of an intellectual experience, right? So it's not necessarily animal. It's like it precedes every type of description you could have, because it's not, the descriptions come starting with Chabad Nahim, you know what I'm saying? Chagas Nahim.
What about like plants, maybe? Yeah, bacteria. Or
I'm just saying it's the presentation of the soul versus its non-presentation. That's the will, right? Once it's present, in other words, if you want to talk about it in terms of like Or Ein Sof, it's either in an essential state, which is sort of not seen, or it's in the Or Ein Sof state, where there's light. The Or Ein Sof is like the will, right? It's like presented itself, but it doesn't have any description yet. It's just Ein Sof. And then that Or Ein Sof, that will then dress itself up into actual body parts, which is intellect and emotion. So the will of the soul is synonymous with the soul itself. Otherwise the soul is just in a non-being state.
Do you mean just like the regular will of like I will to, I don't know, like whatever.
But this is a will to just be. In other words, it precedes the will to do anything, because once you want a will to do anything, it already comes with calculation, and it comes with an emotional charge. So that level of will has already been dressed up. It's very hard to imagine what this looks like.
Raw will,
which basically is essentially just your pulse, your life force, right? Without being differentiated into any direction. So in the same way, the seichel and the midos, the intellect and the emotion of the nefesh, hen gam kein b'chinas tikunin ulevushin. They're also merely tikunin, i.e. garments, shanefesh mistakenes umislabeshes behen, that the soul gets enclosed in. Vehen kli hanefesh, right? It's a vessel for the soul to use, a vessel for the will to use.
The body.
Thoughts and speech, right?
No, the intellect and the emotion are vessels for the soul to pick up and use. Just like the body, we said a moment ago, when it allows the soul to accomplish something in a material way, right? Otherwise the soul would be unable to affect the material world. So too, the intellect and the emotions, they allow the soul to affect something in an intellectual way, or to have an intellectual experience, or to have an emotional experience. They're like the body for the will.
So if someone has like a hard time having an emotional experience, they need like a better garment,
I mean, it's possible to go down that road, but what we're talking about right now is not really like found in life experiences. We're talking about the original inserting of your soul without parts into a soul. So in other words, once you're talking about if a person this, if a person that, you're already talking about a person who has intellect and emotion and how he's working with them. So it's already after the fact.
Right.
We're talking about the initial insertion of the soul into its vessels of intellect and emotion. And through these faculties, intellect and emotion, the soul is now able to affect things like, and they are like the axe in the hand of the woodchopper, right? The famous analogy that the person simply, like the person can't cut down the tree without the axe, right? He needs his tools. So too, the soul cannot think without its garments of Chabad. It cannot feel without its garments of Chagas, right? So it's holding onto these tools to allow it to accomplish its goals, right? The person's there. It's really the person's power who can chop down a tree. I mean, it's not the axe that can chop down a tree. The axe can't do anything.
Cannot do anything without the 10 speheros?
Right. I mean, it can have will, but it can't affect anything. It can't actually accomplish any of its pa'ulas, of its deeds, without first having its tools to use, which is thinking or feeling.
And there's
Right?
nothing like this in Olam Haba?
Olam Haba, it also has the 10 garments, right? These 10 garments come onto the soul very, 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 very soon, early. That's why the Alter Rebbe doesn't hold himself back from saying, if you remember from that little parentheses, it's the essence of the soul. In other words, it's so one with the soul that in some conversations we just call that the soul.
Whoa.
Because we're talking very, very, refined stuff over here. That before the soul even takes on its like characteristics, that's the real essence of the soul.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
where's the Olam Haba, like in the 4 worlds?
Where's what?
Olam Haba.
Olam Haba is normally talked about as Gan Eden HaElyon and Gan Eden HaTachton, which is Bria and Yetzirah.
What's Chagas?
So what we're talking about would be right now Atzilus, which is an origin of the infinite light dressing up into its original kelim of Chabad, etc. This is like, just like our soul dressed up into intellect and emotions, God Himself dressed up into intellect and emotion, right? That's the thing. God was a pure Or Ein Sof, which is undivisible and unnameable, and He decided to put on His garments of intellect and emotion, right? And that is the 10 spheres of Atzilus. So He, just like the soul goes through this process, God Himself also went through this process.
So what about the two souls though? Is it adjusted through that, or are they just different representations of the same thing?
No, so what happens is once the godly soul has its body, right? So it's already inside of 10 spheros, then it's relevant for there to be a further set of 10 spheres that those 10 spheres can unite with. And that becomes, the animal soul becomes a vessel for the godly soul. The animal soul, for example, is not a vessel for the pure godly soul before it has spheros. Right? The animal soul has no relationship with that. It cannot contain such a thing.
Right.
Only the godly soul has its own unique spheros, which can hold the infinite soul. Once it's already a composite of spheros, it can then have a ability to be held by the 10 spheres of the animal soul, which then, and only then, can the whole package go into a physical goof. Right? So it's like basically, it's like Russian dolls, one goes inside the other. But they're all unified to the point when the godly soul wants to do something, it already is holding the animal soul, which is holding the goof, and it happens instantaneously without any delay. And this is, what are the tools? Is lahov b'midas ha'ava, laskil b'chokhmah. In other words, its tools is not exactly an axe. Its tools is it can now love. It can now maskil. It can now perceive intellectually. It's an amazing thing that you think that those things are just germane to you. But they're not. You need to pick up a tool in order to think, right? It's crazy if you think about it. It's crazy that you can think about it. Shekol zeh v'kayotzi bazeh hu rak pa'ulas hanefesh. All of this and the like. What happened to Yol? All of this and the like is rak pa'ulas hanefesh. It's not the soul itself. It's just the activity of the soul. Vispashtusa, and its extension, its ability to sort of show itself. Remember we said yesterday that there's a difference between concealing garments and revealing garments. Right? Concealing garments is like your clothes which cover up your body, but your body itself is a revealing garment. It's a garment for sure, but it's a garment which is very useful, because without that garment you would not ever be able to know that you haven't had a soul. Right? Your soul is able to express itself only if there's some kli that can be its vehicle of expression. So the intellect and the emotion, they are the expression and the extension of the soul. Without them, you wouldn't know what the soul had in there. Because frankly, the soul does have the ability to think. And the soul does have the ability to feel. But not until there's some kind of a vehicle of expression. And that's what these 10 speheros do for it. That's why they're called adornments, right? As opposed to the lower garments, which are concealing, these are positive type of garments. They adorn it in order to enable it to be more beautiful, because it shows itself. How do you know that what?
How do we know that the Tanya isn't talking about that when he says that the soul is one with its seichel? How do we know he's not talking about it before it went into the dispatches? Maybe
because he says outright that it's the essence of the soul is its 10 speheros. Einan ela mimenu lezulaso. But all these newfound, toys that the soul has, intellect and emotion, is really only the aspects of the soul which are shaykh to the other, right? In other words, the whole purpose of these things is for the soul to come out. Why does it have the soul to come out? Because it has to integrate itself with some other, right? It's now able to think. And what's the idea of thinking? It's going to take some information and think about it. It has to love because there's some object of its love. And all these things are aspects of the soul which are relevant to the other. Einon ela mimene lezulaso. It's only from it to the other. Aval hanefesh mitzad atzma, but the soul in and of itself, he lamayla mikol b'chinas halal. But the soul in and of itself is above all these types of levels. So again, even if you want to say that before the soul dresses up in its body, which I just did say for a second, it had the power to think, it had the power to feel. Even when those powers were inside the soul, still those types of powers were not really the soul itself. It was the soul's ability to relate. And they were just not shining yet, right? So there was the soul's ability to relate to the other before those powers actually got off the ground and got seen. But bechlal, all those powers are only the soul's powers to relate to the other. Whereas the soul itself is beyond all these powers entirely. And we're saying here is that the intellect and the emotions, where do we see that they're really only shaykh to the other? They're relevant to the outside world in some way, or the theoretical outside world, is because they're mekablim shinoim. They change. Intellect and emotion are both what's called bali shinoi. They're subject to change. Kibamidos yesh katnus v'gadlus. When it comes to emotions, it's very easy to see. There's small and big. In other words, what he's saying is that shakatin, in other words, childish midos, and adult mature midos. Shakatin oev devarim ktanim. A child, he's all, turning over himself and crying and screaming and laughing over a Lego, right? Mm-hmm. And an adult doesn't have that type of emotions. His emotions are more mature, right? We hope. Mm-hmm. So you see that your emotions grow. What's able to trigger your emotion goes from small to big. Vaseichel kozman shemaskinin, and also the intellect. Clearly, you can see that there's a change that happens to a person over his life with his intellect. The older you get, the wiser you become. We hope, right?
He seems to be saying the opposite, no?
Vaseichel, no.
Because he says kulu. He seems to be saying negative.
I don't think so.
It's kozman shemaskinin.
Oh, it's amiyaretz? No, but that's.
Chazal said.
Yeah.
Yeah. When amiyaretz get older, they get stupider.
Amiyaretz, okay. But not chachamim. So why do you want to say he's talking about amiyaretz?
Go both ways. He's saying.
All right, so let's look at the positive side, man. All right. So anyway, the older you get, the wiser you become. We hope. I'm just going to stay with my original statement there. V'lo shayach kol zeh ba'atzris hanefesh u'mahusa. And none of this is relevant when it comes to the actual soul, that part which is pre-investiture. It can't get big and small and get old and young and go through the seasons, winter, spring, summer, and fall, so to speak. It doesn't have change. She eino ba'ala shinoim klal, because you're talking about Hashem over here. And Hashem does not have big and small. Hashem is just one eternal, enduring essence, which is not changeable. Right? If it could be changed, God forbid, that would mean Hashem has parts, and the parts are, different sizes, and there's up and there's down, and there's before and there's after. You don't want to say anything, God forbid, like that for Hashem's true essence, because that removes the notions of eternality, right? So if He in fact has these type of things going on, it's only taking place in this aspect of Him which is for the other. In other words, it's the ability for Hashem to create a world filled with change, to create an entity which could get wiser or the less so, or more mature or less mature, right? But none of that is actually happening to Him. Yeah?
So we're saying that the body or the 10 tefillot could evolve.
Yes, they can evolve, but not Hashem. Because and you see that, in other words, the proof is in the pudding. Because they change, that itself is a proof that they're not Him. Because He doesn't change. He does not get changed. Okay, so this gets into a whole situation where, the parts of your body, which we just expressed a moment ago, which the soul is affected when you stub your toe, and the soul gets hurt, that's not talking about the essence of your soul. It can't be, because the essence of your soul can't get hurt. It can't have an effect from something. It can't be affected by something. Right? That's why there's all kinds of conversation. This mimer is essentially based on the pasuk. If you look at right at the top, under where it says Parshas Vayeira, it says Shayach lepasuk er dana. You see that? What's er dana? It's from the story of Sodom, which is coming up shortly in the parsha. It says Hashem had to go down and see what was going on over there. And this whole mimer is coming to deal with these types of psukim. And there's more than one of them. Hashem changed His mind, it says in Parshas Noach, In other words, what do you mean He changed His mind? What do you mean He has to go down and look? What are you talking about? He's not a person. So He's trying to explain to you what the 10 speheros are, that all of this is relevant only when Hashem dresses up in His suit, which is Bali Shinoi, which can change. It does have, so to speak, high and low, and can grow and find things out, as it were, to a certain degree. That all this kind of talk is relevant. Because the essence of the soul does not change, and therefore cannot be affected by your stubbing your toe. It doesn't suddenly feel a pain. Because that would be something new that happened. And nothing new happens when it comes to the essence. It's eternal, same in the beginning, middle, and end. And there isn't even a beginning, middle, and end.
What's the purification process then?
Because we're talking about the essence of Hashem. And we're not negating the fact that there's a whole other thing, not the essence of Hashem, where we spend most of our time. Where you get old and you can and you get more mature. There are changes. Even when you go into Gan Eden, you're not in the essence. You're just in another part of the spheritic domain.
This is crazy.
You understand?
Not really.
In other words, what's problem? Why are you suddenly having a problem with being purified with Gehenna or Gan Eden? Why is that suddenly an issue?
Because I understood that the soul, it gets a little, we compromise the spiritual integrity of it.
Time out. That's what I thought you were saying. We ourselves mentioned a moment ago. The soul feels pain when you stub your toe, right? So we're not negating that, but we're just saying that's not the essence of the soul. That's the part of the soul which is relevant to enclothing itself into a body, and that was the whole big fireworks we had a moment ago, that it becomes one with the body. And that whole conversation of the soul becomes one with the body, fine and good. It's not the essence of the soul. Hugs all around.
Wait.
Right? It's not the essence of the soul. It's just a part of the soul which is shaykh to the other. It's the 10 speheros of the soul, which are sort of like ejected from the soul. And in that realm there's the notion of intellect, emotion, high, low, unification with the goof.
So it's the defusing?
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but
does that go back to like that conversation we had, I think it was last week, about Hashem enclothing himself within the speheros? Now, like, he's like called Chachma because of that?
Yeah, this is the exact same conversation as that. Yeah.
He's enclothing himself in those speheros.
Right.
He's not...
Tikunim, right?
It's all about
but the enclosure, he becomes one with it. There's a slight contradiction here, because we're saying that he becomes one with it, right? When he encloses himself, it's not like putting on a pair of pants. It's like putting on a body, and the body, it gets so enclosed that the body feels pain, the soul feels pain.
Right.
But nonetheless, we're saying that nonetheless, it's still a certain aspect of Hashem which gets enclosed in there. Not the full gamut of Hashem, which is His essence, because there it's not shaykh change, or it's certainly to feel pain and pleasure, etc.
So how does it feel pain?
Because that's not the essence of the soul. It's the part of the soul which goes into the body and becomes united with the body. But so what we're basically getting from here is that there's something called sovev and mamali. Can we talk about it in these terms? Right? There's sovev light, which is an encompassing light, which is a light which does not get invested, right? Even though it maintains a position. For example, the Or Ein Sof is in this room, but it doesn't get invested into this room in as much as that the finite parameters of this cup, in their own sort of parameters, are receiving the Or Ein Sof inside of it. If they would, goodbye cup, right? You can't be a finite object and experience infinity inside you at the same time. But that does not negate the ability for the Or Ein Sof to be every single place that this cup is. It's just not contained in the cup as far as the cup is concerned. So that's called Sovev Kolomi, which is, it's everywhere, but it's not experienced by anything except itself.
That's what it is?
Yeah, but then there's this other level called the Mamali Kolomi. The light which fills the world, and there's a vessel called a cup, and there's a divine minimal contracted light, which is just enough to go into that cup and give it its boundaries and make it stay there, and not a drop more. Otherwise, we'd lose the cup. So that light, Pashit, unites with the cup, so that it's impossible to tell the difference between the matter and the energy, so to speak. It's one thing. It's not like there's light sitting inside of a piece of styrofoam. The light is the styrofoam, becomes one with it. But so didn't you just say therefore God becomes contracted? No, it's the mamali aspect of God. His sovev remains completely untouched by this whole experience.
Simultaneously one and different. Simultaneously one and different.
Okay.
So the soul is just like a super contracted part of Hashem? Is that what we're saying?
Yes, the soul, the 10 speheros, is a super contracted part of Hashem. The soul is not contracted. The soul is Hashem Himself, right?
The soul does get hurt. What?
The part of the soul which contracts, which is super contracted, that gets hurt. The part which is not contracted doesn't get hurt. That's the difference between the sovev and the mamali aspect. Listen, I'm not knocking you. This is it's subtle thinking that's going on over here. But at the same time, it's subtle thinking. It's on every single page of this book. Understanding this, like how to think like this, sovev and mamali, it's not the way people normally think. So I mean, I'm not criticizing anyone here if it's not sinking in, but just have to say it over and over again and just try and visualize what's going on here.
Sovev is the raw, undifferentiated
yes.
part, and the mamali is
the unraw, differentiated.
So the whole soul doesn't actually jump in, but like it still becomes one with the body?
Yeah, the aspect of the soul which is shaykh to the zulas, which is relevant to the other.
That becomes,
which means that part of the soul is inside of Hashem to begin with, right? In other words, Hashem can think, Hashem can feel, but those powers are not, even before they invest themselves into vessels, they're still inside of Him, but even at that level, they're not really Him. They're just things that He could exude for the sake of having a relationship with the other, with a world.
Same with us.
Same with us, yeah. We are also, our essential soul is also completely beyond relationship. It's just one with God. But it has in it theoretical powers that if they would invest themselves into speheros and into bodies, they can have all kinds of extended experiences outside of themselves.
Is that why the true process must take place on an intellectual and emotional level?
I just got it from both ears there.
Is that why tshuva must take place on an intellectual and emotional level? To affect the mamali?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. The knower, the known, and all that business is how Hashem invests Himself into His speheros, right? Because it's already a description. Okay. Going on one more second here. We have another minute.
5 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so this aspect of the soul, which is beyond, which is the essential part, it does not get affected by the changes of the body. Because that aspect of it, the essence of it, doesn't come down into the goof. And again, does that mean it's not found here? It is found here. It's just not found here in a way that my goof is picking up on it. Right? That's what it means. It's not invested into the goof, but your infinite essential soul powers are found inside your body. That's what we call, so to speak, the chaya and the yechida. Because when you tap into things which are just way beyond, your revealed powers, beyond your intellect, right? and beyond your emotions and so forth, and you're able to like sort of have Mesiras Nefesh. Where's this coming from? Something which is so powerful that it is a power which will override the whole existence of your body. There's a part of you which is willing to have your own self be eliminated from the existence because it's more powerful and deeper than the part of your existence which is in your body. Isn't that crazy? What makes a person want to give up their life? So if you're saying that there's some kind of a 72 virgins, that's different because you're not really giving up your life. You just want a better life. That's not the Jewish Mesiras Nefesh. The Jewish Mesiras Nefesh is we're willing to not be. We're going to take our whole situation here and just make it not be. What part of you can make yourself not be? In other words, it must be some part which is beyond you, which can make yourself not be. Because the part of you which is being, it would never excuse itself, right? Its whole essence is to be. There's no cause in the world that can make it not be. But because there's aspects of you which are beyond investiture into your body, and they have an effect on you from time to time, they can just take your whole being and say, no, I don't want it anymore. There's something more important than my being. That's intense, right? That's the essence of your soul, which is not in any way experienceable by your body, but sometimes it just kicks in.
And then what?
and it makes you basically die before you bow down to an idol. Something which just defies logic in every way because it's coming from beyond intellect, right? It's basically will. And the will itself has a place before it comes into the body. Like we said, the will can enter the body, but also has its original standing before it enters the body. So if that original will wants to act and just take away the whole body, it can do whatever it wants with the body. It can invest into the body and use the body as a vessel, or it could just say, I don't want this body anymore. I'm more served to take the body out of the game because God's name will be more sanctified than if the will is inside the body. And it can just take the body away, right? It's crazy if you think about this. There's powers of our own self that we do not realize are running the show.
Mesiras Nefesh, like how long?
Mesiras Nefesh is basically the proof of it.
What is the definition of mysterious nefesh?
Mesiras Nefesh, Mesiras, to give over your soul, to give your soul away. Yeah, to Moser Nefesh. Yeah.
How long can this feeling take over someone? Like, is it like a?
It could be perpetual.
Permanent.
The actual, if you want to know the truth, the whole Rebbe's mission is to enable us in our generation to experience the type of Mesiras Nefesh that the Yidden had to have in Russia, and when they were mamish every single day getting up and willingly, walking to their death if they had to, and to permeate that feeling into us without necessarily having the negative effects of the world. In other words, just to bring ourselves to live on this level. That's the idea of shlichus. I'm going to go out to the middle of nowhere and just turn this whole city into mamish Yerushalayim. Right? What can possibly cause a person to have such enthusiasm and so forth, and give away his life basically, because a person could live a normal life. Right? You don't have to go against the entire grain of the world, be like a little Avram Avinu, fight with the kings, what's pushing this person? It's something beyond his intellect, it's coming from the soul.
It's a paradigm shift.
Okay. Okay, so I don't know, we're going to have to hold here. But I can't see the clock, but I think we're out of time.
8:30.
Okay.
It's living on a different.
8:30 on the dot.
Ooh, Rabbi, today was a good getter class.
Get it, baby.
Today was you've established these pieces. Now let's start pushing some of them together.
Right.
That's crazy about the whole concept of the red zone and it being enveloped in the body, incorporating that with the spirits, incorporating that with the Malay and the Survey, and all kind of